Hey, this is Braxton. Today I'm going to take you through my new tune, which is called There's Still Time. It's out now on Anjunadeep. Let's crack on. Okay, so the way that I work is pretty much the same on every single track. So in terms of sort of doing these track breakdowns, it would just be me saying the same thing over and over and over again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through this track, pick out a few little bits that I found quite interesting. And then on the previous video, I got you to ask a load of questions, and I've got a few questions I'm going to answer, and I'm going to show you examples in this track answering those questions. Does that make sense? Probably not, but I've had a coffee, I'm awake, let's do this, let's crack on. Same as always, all my drums at the top here. So we go from kicks, and then like this stuff here is kind of like low percussive sort of sounds. Hats, claps and shakers and all that sort of stuff all here. Vocals on this track, because I've got a little vocal sample in there. Leads and synth stuff, all here. Bass, and then atmosphere and crashes and all that sort of stuff at the bottom. I don't often do this with drums, with kick drums anyway, where I've got multiple kick drums, but I've got 2 kick drums. This is kind of like the main one. And this one was just like a bit of a boomier, boxier thing. Actually, let me show you with... this one's got like a bit more of a tail to it sort of thing. The problem is when you have kind of like, let's see that a bit better. When you have kind of multiple kicks, what inevitably happens is you end up with like phasing issues sort of thing. So I was having to kind of like tweak this one, the boxier one, until I got it to a place where it kind of sounded good. I was happy with how it sounded on my speakers and on my headphones and all that sort of stuff. And then where I can, I'll get them stem mastered. So I'll send out individual groups or like individual tracks if I can. And then they have a bit more, the mastering engine then has a bit more control over how the whole track is going to sound. And he came back and was like, yeah, that kick is kind of weak. He whacked a kind of like, sort of boosted the transient at the start, where like in this kind of space here, and made it sound a lot better. And when I've played it in clubs since, it's like, oh yeah, it's miles better. Like my room and my setup sound great as far as I can tell. But when you get it into a bigger space and a bigger room, you want to know that, especially kicks and basses and things like that, that matter so much in club situations, translate. And yeah, he was able to kind of like improve that sound basically. This is all kind of like percussive stuff, weird sort of things are panned and just going all over the place and weird effects going everywhere, and loads of hats and claps and shakers and bits and bobs. And then we've got vocals. The vocal sample, this was the original vocal sample, which is from a drum and bass sample pack. In the heat of the day we come undone. And I hated the lyrics, and I hated the fact that it was 174 BPM. It's this bit, but I quite like the melody. So I took that sample, sent it to my missus, was like, can you rewrite these lyrics? Got her to write some lyrics, got a friend of mine, singer, to re-sing my missus's lyrics with that melody, and then that then became... yeah. And then there was a lot of... my missus wrote almost like verse chorus sort of thing, and it was great, but I was just like, the more I kind of worked on it, the more I just kept slimming it down to like one little bit and end up just with this one little hook of There's Still Time. This is the original, this is the actual lyric. But I quite like, which is a beautiful sentiment, but I think I quite like to work with lyrics. I like to keep lyrics as vague as possible, unless it's like a featured artist who's working on the song. I'll tend to keep them as vague as possible because it's I don't know, I find it more interesting. Then we got the main kind of theme, which was the original. This is how the track started out originally. I wonder if I've got... oh, yeah, there we go. Hang on. This was the original, like piano. Is this it? Yeah. Yeah, this is it. So I was putting together like a chill record, and that got turned into this. And then I kept the original piano sound, which was the Oliver Arnold's one, I think, yeah. Which just sounds incredible. And then there's a separate Bosendorfer that comes in just for sort of brightness and sharpness. And then there's pads, which was this fella, the Prophet. So that was kind of like the original sort of starting point. And then for some reason I was just like, I want to make it proggy. So yeah, it's kind of like 2 different tracks, so it's, yeah. Quite dark, sort of brooding, sort of building sort of element, and then it kind of opens up in that breakdown with all the vocals and the kind of euphoric elements, and it goes back into that sort of darkness again. And then down here we've got bass bits, lots of different bass bits. I kind of wanted that main bass is obviously the Moog, and then all of these I like Prophet and little bits of Moog here and there, just like different bass bits doing different stuff. Just filling out that groove, I guess, with kind of like basics. And then we've got stringy bits and pads and like, what's that? Not that one, that's effects. And like strings and all that sort of stuff, and atmospheres. And then down at the bottom is obviously all of the crashes, and I think I used the Prophet again for like sort of builds and effects, and you can get quite a really wide sounding sort of synth effects on here. Cool. And then all the bass stuff obviously gets sent to a bass bus, which has EQ, just shaving off some of the sort of the low end sort of side information. When you were playing it in a club, that makes the low end just sound a bit too loose and a bit all over the place, basically. And then a bit of multiband compression as well, just on that very, very low end, on those subs, basically. And then we've got the synths. This is the synth bus here. This has got, where's my synths? There we go. A bit of Millennia, adding a bit of sort of fake width. And then EQ, this is probably just to visualize, just to see what was going on. All of the effects also get routed into their own bus, probably lopping off the bottom end. Yeah, just taking off the bottom end and the sort of the very, very high nastiness at the top, like the most harsh bits at the top. And then on my stereo bus, on this, I've gone for the Moog, whatever it's called, Klangheim. That's doing quite a lot, actually. Get the vocal. And then the Tomo, which I quite like. I think I went through this on a previous video as well. Which just, I don't know what it does to the low end, but I quite like what it does to the low end. It just makes it sound a bit more round and warm. If I mute it, if I bypass it. It's only subtle, but if you've got headphones on, you'll hear that. To me, it sounds a lot flatter. It just gives it a nice kind of like boost. It's similar to like what you can do with the Pultec, where you can like boost the sort of low end and then duck sort of just after it. Sort of scooping everything as well, so it's giving it a boost to the top end, a little boost to the low end. Metric AB on my master. I'm not gonna AB now because I haven't got, what's it called, copyright control over these tracks, so YouTube will just ban the video. But this is really important to kind of study your sonics up against another track. So for example, one thing that I do with it quite a lot is, so this track here, Clouds, for example, a Pig and Dan tune, that the low end on that tune is so nice. It's so warm and like, it's so loud and meaty, and you know, they're unbelievable producers. But on here, you can just solo your low end and an A/B between your version and their version, and just get an idea of sonically what's different about yours. The thing is with this one, I know for a fact, like when I was A/Bing, like their low end was so much cleaner, and it gives you an ability to kind of like visually see what's going on, but also kind of like sonically study what's going on in the sound between your track and a really high level tune sort of thing. Cool. That is a quick run through of some of the elements on There's Still Time. That's what it's called, isn't it? Yes. On the previous video, I was like, send me any questions over and I'll kind of answer them in this video. So I'm going to go through some of those questions now. Why don't we go in there now? Who is this? Aaron Demir 68 something or other. They said, hey, Braxton, would you be a chance in the future for you to share some insight on your general approach or principles for creating stereo depth, front to back perception, and that 3D feeling? Yes, absolutely. You're also asking about kind of like mixing and stuff. Like, in terms of it, everything is done in the mix of your track, essentially. So as you're kind of working, you're kind of mixing and making sonic decisions based on what you're hearing and stuff. Everything should be done at that stage. When it gets sent off for mastering, obviously you can send them like one stereo pre-master. At that stage, all they're going to do is just make it louder, effectively. They're going to do a few things here and there in terms of like width and depth and things like that, but because they're affecting the whole track, there's not really a great deal more they can do. If you can get stuff stem mastered, you tend to give them a bit more creative control over kind of the decision they're making. But realistically, they're still making decisions based on the sounds that you've given them. So if those sounds aren't in the right places or aren't in the right locations, there's not a great deal they can do about it. The best way to create depth is just to think about what depth is. And depth is essentially taking a sound and putting it from one space, putting it from the foreground and putting it in the background. If I was to take this microphone and me talking to this microphone and move this microphone into the back of the room and carry on talking, sonically what would happen is the top end would go, the bottom end would go, and the reverb of the room would play a part in the sound, in the overall sound, rather than this direct sound that you've got right now. It's all of this other space is coming into play as well. And that's basically how you create depth with a sound in a song. You just do the same sort of thing. You top and tail it pretty much. You put a bit of reverb on it that it puts it in a specific space. You don't have to have like a full wet reverb. You can still have the sound sort of mixed in, the reverb mixed in. But as soon as you do that, that sound then appears in that space. The most important part, and one of the most important parts of mixing, is you need contrast. So like, it's a bit like photography. If you're trying to get over the idea of scale, you're going to want something in the foreground and the thing in the background to kind of show scale effectively. And it's the same sort of principle. You want to have something to kind of balance, to counter that sound that is either in the background or either left and right if we're talking about mono signals and stereo signals, or like side signals. So for example, what have I got on here? This stuff here. So all these kind of like stabby, like these are good examples because this is quite sort of, I mean, the delays are adding a bit of width to this sound, but this is a predominantly sort of mono sounding source. But if you were to just listen to this over and over, you'd be like, well, because of the delays there's quite a lot of stereo information. But as soon as we bring in a real stereo sounding sound, now this initial kind of punch sounds a lot more sort of mono, a lot more centered. Does that kind of make sense? I hope that makes sense. It's contrast, and then it's kind of techniques like this. Like, let me show you with this, for example. In terms of, if you're talking about 3D perspective, I do this on quite a lot of stuff with this. You create, what's it called? Is it a Hass effect? Is that what it's called? I think it's the Hass effect, where you essentially, I'm going to try and explain it as best I can. Effectively, what you're doing is you're delaying the signal in one of the ears by 40 milliseconds. I think anything more than 40 milliseconds, it kind of starts to sound a bit weird. But this signal, this sound, essentially that's everything going at the same time, everything kind of like arriving on both left and right at the same time. What we're going to do with this is we're going to delay the right signal by 40 milliseconds. So the left signal happens, the right signal happens 40 milliseconds after it. And it creates this crazy, almost like psychoacoustic stereo effect, or like 3D effect, I guess. Calm down. There we go. So yeah, that and that within the context of the whole mix, if you've got more and more mono things happening, there we go. So if I like bring in more mono elements, that sounds even more wide now. It sounds even more kind of like, if I take that effect off, it sounds cool still, but it just doesn't, I don't know. It sounds more exciting. But again, I'd say the main things are contrast, having something in the foreground and having something in the background, and then having, you know, mono things and stereo things. If everything was like wide, if all your sounds were kind of like hitting and they were all wide, the track would not sound like it's got any width, because your brain just isn't able to process that information. It needs the balance and it needs the contrast in order to understand, in order to kind of like then dissect where those sounds are placed, if you know what I mean. So play around with that, I'd say. Just have like, build up a track where you've got like a lot of things that are kind of like happening right down the middle of the track. Everything is kind of like sort of summed into like a mono group or something like that. And then you just introduce one element where you've got that technique, for example, where you've got that weird sort of phasey stereo delay. These settings work on any delay, by the way. It's literally all you're doing is delaying one channel by 40 milliseconds. So find any sort of delay unit that lets you do that. Yeah, does that kind of answer? Maybe that answers your question. Next question, Musk says, on the AMIC EQ, you can mono some of the bottom end, or do you leave that to the mastering engineer? On the AMIC, yeah, on that. So on the previous track, I was using AMIC on my stereo bus. What do I use? Mix bus heavy. This is going to sound better now, isn't it? Sounds better. So on here, you can mono all your low end. Actually, let me show you with this on as well. And then you can add kind of like stereo width across your whole mix. If I do this, just so you can see it, I've got quite a lot of low information in here. If we bring the mono maker up, that just basically monos everything everything below 200 kilohertz now, 200 hertz, sorry. So this is all kind of like monoed, which again is kind of like a good idea if you're playing stuff in a club. You kind of, you know, you'll hear different things from different people where they'll say you have to mono everything below like 300 hertz or something like that. I experiment on every track, and it's just a case of if the track sounds better, then keep it in. If it doesn't, don't worry about it, regardless of what people say the rules are. But I tend to leave it all to a mastering engineer. I'll leave all that to a mastering engineer. I feel like if I do it, I end up a bit too heavy-handed with it, and I'll tend to mono a ridiculous amount and then add way too much stereo width. The problem with that is especially with stereo width, is you then introduce a lot more phasing issues, especially with those kind of like high frequencies in the top end and stuff like that. Nico Antuna says, how do you mix the shakers and hi-hats to be thick and full without being harsh? I think with shakers and hats and stuff, one thing you can do is obviously just like lop off that top end if it's sounding a bit too harsh. One thing that I've found quite a lot is it's not always your hats that sound harsh, it's your hats combined with your synths that sound harsh. So if you've got like a lot of synths that have like a lot of very bright sort of energy, like these pads are really sharp. There's a lot going on in the top end. So you want to kind of curve off a little bit of that, because that harshness and brightness combined with all that hat information just adds for more noise in that top end of the spectrum. And all of that energy going into the high end of the frequency of the track is going to create harshness. It's a good idea to kind of like shelve off a lot of the synths to make space for the hi-hats. And then you get clarity of like really clear hi-hats in your mix. And they don't sound too harsh, they just sound present, sort of thing. If you get to the stage where you're having to boost your hi-hats to break through the top end of your synth sound, that's where the problem is. It's not necessarily the hi-hats that are not loud enough. It's that there's too much conflict going on there. So in the same way that we scoop out space for like bass drums and kick drum, for bass lines and kick drums and things like that, you need to do the same thing for your hi-hats and your synth sounds and vocals as well, especially with vocals. Like lop off everything after like, I don't know, whatever the vocal is. I'm not going to say a frequency because that's just stupid, but get rid of your top end. Take your top off. Buses and sends. Thanks for doing this, man. I got a question from Deleuze Music. Oh, Deleuze. Hey, cool. Thanks for doing this, man. Wanted to ask you about your buses sends for the atmosphere reverb delay. I see you're not using many inserts. What's your go-tos? There's a couple of things that I do on everything. One is this H delay, which I have a lot of stuff that goes to it, but very, like a little bit of loads of stuff goes to it. And it's just a delay unit, fully wet, turn the analog off because it's just noise, unnecessary noise. And it's just a ping pong delay. And it just adds like another element that kind of glues elements, the glues kind of like parts of the track together. That's one thing that I get, that like lots of stuff. So if you go to like, where are we? Let's pick something at random. Yeah, there we go, perfect. This thing, which is just a that weird atmospheric sort of granular thing going on. This gets sent there, and then it also gets sent to this one, and this is just the same thing again. It's just a reverb that loads of stuff gets sent to. It's on an old reactor unit. It's got a delay on it. It's got a filter on it. It's got a reverb that kind of like washes everything, and it's kind of constantly moving. And again, I think it just gives, those two just kind of like give the track a little bit of life. Where's the H delay? There we go. Molson Greg says, what are the plugins to use for pads, synths, apart from Zebra? Ambassador still your plugin for enhancing low sounds? Yes. In terms of plugins, I use Diva a little bit, mainly Zebra for pads, and then the Prophet for pads as well. So Ambassador is a plugin. I think on the last track I was using Ambassador to kind of like add more low end to my low end. What Ambassador does is it kind of adds more sort of weight. Where are we here? By kind of like duplicating, so now there's even more energy in that bottom end here, and then you can even add more subs as well, so you get your subs just fill out at the bottom. I mean, you can play around with kind of levels and all that sort of stuff, but it's quite good for adding sort of weight to your low end. It all depends on like source material, because if I'm using the Moog, which I did on this, that's the cleanest, tightest sounding low end that I found. Actually, and this actually makes quite good bass sounds as well. It depends on the track. So sometimes if I'll be using a certain plugin and the low end just isn't there, you can add Ambassador to kind of like sort of duplicate, reharmonize your subs. The problem is it can be a bit chaotic. It can create a lot of noise down there and all that sort of stuff. So you've got to be kind of a bit like lean into it a little bit sort of thing, rather than like go heavy-handed with it. What did we not do? First element. What is the first element you start with? Bass, chords, melody? It varies. Like I said with this one, I think that first thing that I started with was that piano sample, which I'd written for like an ambient thing, which I still might finish actually, because it's still quite nice. That was the original inspiration, and then obviously that then turned into this. Which is just, I mean, which is how it works. If I was in more of a breaksy mood that day, then I probably would have taken that sample and made it into a more of a breaksy sort of vibe. It's different every single day. It can be just a random percussive sound that I hear in the street, or something that I've sampled off someone else's record that I like and then make a track out of. Every element, it just can be anything. The most important element is just inspiration. It's not about starting with a bass. For me anyway, it's not about starting with a bass or starting with drums or starting with melody, whatever. It's starting with something that kind of inspires you to build a track around it. Plonk that in, and then just listen to it over and over and over and see what, get it in your head, like the idea of how you want the beats to go, how you want the drum, how you want the synths to go, how you want everything to kind of go around it, and then start building around that. Fresco selects, and I got some questions on Instagram as well. When do you know when to stop with a track? When I hit the deadline and Anjuno going, can you send over a pre-master, please, because it needs to be uploaded to Spotify today. That's when I know when to stop with the track. If that doesn't arrive that day, I'll just keep working on it, which is a really, really bad habit. But for me personally, it's always a case of, like, I need the restrictions, I need the deadlines in order to finish the thing. Otherwise, I'll just keep going and I'll change it and I'll change it and I'll change it. I think one of the hardest things in music is like finishing a track. And for a lot of producers out there, they probably experience that, where it's just like you make a track and then you do like 10 different versions of it. And every single one of those is probably good enough. But it's just because you lose that love of it at a certain point, so then you rewrite it as something else, and then you lose that love again, you rewrite it as something else. And you're constantly chasing that initial high that you had when you wrote it in the first place. And that's just the way it is for everyone. I think I tend to use those deadlines that labels set, where they're just like, we need it by this date. And it's like, okay, cool. I will get a version done to you by that date, and I will make sure that I am happy with it. And if I'm not happy with it, that's my own fault, sort of thing. Which is, yeah, I don't know, it's kind of a weird way of working, I guess. But I feel like that's how everybody works. I don't know, maybe not. Cool, that's There's Still Time, which is out now on Anjunadeep. So, you know, listen to it if you want, or don't. If you have any questions, stick them in the comment section, and I will get back to you. And I'll get back to you in the next video as well. I'll show you some of those things in the next video. If you want to, I can do the whole, you know, full track breakdown where we go through each track, you know, every single channel, but one by one, and go through every plugin. But those videos are so boring. They're like 5 hours long. I feel like this is a much better way. If you've got a question, ask it, and I'll do my best to answer it in the follow-up. But yeah, hopefully that was useful to some of you. Take care, and I will see some of you very, very soon.